Thank you so much, Camelia. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Indeed, I have the great pleasure of moderating this session. Let me start straight away with the topic. So, as you know, we're talking about technology, trust, and democratic participation, because we all know that online political communication and information really shapes how people form their opinions, their values, with an impact on, in reality, on our democracy. So all of you as civic educators have a major role to play. We understand these are a bit of complex topics, but at the same time, we want to make them intuitive because actually we're all exposed to them as citizens. And so today's session is really aimed at helping you, doing your job as best as you can by first, as Camelia said, understanding what we're talking about really with some practical example from especially some countries like Hungary, Bulgaria, but then also what's the EU kind of framework here when we talk about technology, communication, and trust in democracy. And then the second part will be a more interactive part. So I just want to say two things before I hand over to our experts. One is, please stay present. I understand online events are very difficult sometimes to follow. Maybe you're in between meetings after lunch, but I really invite you to secure this time for yourselves because this is such an interesting and relevant topic for your job. And we really try to put together an agenda that is both, if you like, pedagogical, but also interactive. So really to make the most out of it. And the second thing I want to say is stay until the end. I know there's always a temptation to leave, but I have to say, out of my experience, aside from always learning a lot from panel discussion, what I usually remember the most is in the interactive part, which will be guided by our amazing Maja Nenadović. So please stay with us until the end. So the first speaker we have is Ruslan Trad. He's from Bulgaria. He's an expert of information ecosystem, but also security, and he will really help us understand a couple of very relevant things, especially for you, again, civic educators, which are, first of all, what's the state of play, if you like, of digital information? And what is the impact of this online communication in reality? But before I hand over to Ruslan, what I would like you to do, so that we test if you're still with us, is to maybe think of one word that can come up in your mind when I say digital information space. So what do you feel about digital information space today? How would you describe digital information space today? And if you can drop that in the chat, that would be great. Like just one word. It can be an adjective, it can be a feeling, it can be whatever really comes to your mind. And I see noise, polluted, chaos. Yes, indeed, absolutely. So maybe our speakers today can help us navigate in this noisy, polluted, confusing, overwhelming digital information space. So I'll stop talking now. Ruslan, over to you. Thank you so much. If you can help us start the conversation with a bit of a big picture. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alessandra and Camelia, and the whole structure behind these panels. Maybe sounds very, how say, we are smiling, but the topic is terrible. And until recently, me and my colleagues are following different, let's say, trends for disinformation across Europe, but not only, because more or less the disinformation narratives and trends are mixing with other regions more close stationed to Europe, especially North Africa, Middle East, and in general Eurasian region. What I mean is that we are following already not only Russian disinformation trends, but also Chinese supported and different European even trends supported by the far right and far left parties and movements across the continent. What I want to shed light more on that issue is how these narratives are affecting the young generation, and especially with the important cases coming from across the continent, not only from our region where I'm stationed on the Balkans, but also, for example, Northern Europe, where in Sweden we have examples of 10-year-olds already affected by far-right movements. They want to recruit new members of the different movements across the continent. And for me, it's very interesting and important to understand how these narratives are evolving very fast, including with the importance of AI and how these tools are being used for not only for producing content, but also automation of distributing of this content and messaging different target groups. Yes, the Balkans is one of the most important parts of Europe in meaning of narratives, and also evolving these narratives into more broad approach across Europe, more or less in the past 10 years. I need to say that this is not a new trend, but we have new stages of the trend, and the narratives evolving thanks to the new tools we are facing right now. So many of us are using these tools maybe every day in our tasks and also in our work, but these tools are using also from different movements across Europe for distributing this content. This content is, more generally speaking, very violent, anti-migration oriented in more of the cases, but also anti-establishment. This sounds maybe nothing new because we are facing for many years such narratives, but right now there is a specific targeting group, including in Bulgaria, of youths using mostly TikTok, but also Telegram, which are not linked to any political party or any mainstream patriotic, nationalistic, far-right group in the country or in the region. These groups are more or less independent. They are considering themselves something opposite to mainstream political system. They don't believe in politicians. They don't believe even in the mainstream patriotic and nationalistic movements. So they are communicate between themselves in closed chat groups, in mostly in Telegram, but also in Facebook. Facebook continued to be one of the most important and most used platforms in Bulgaria, but in the region also, not only in Bulgaria. And they are reproducing narratives coming from mainly two sides right now. From the US survivalist movements and nationalistic movements, like White Life Matters, which is still a thing here in the Balkans and still evolving and mixing with the local content and local propaganda. And the second thing is pan-European far-right movements, especially the northern movements, which more and more became part of this infrastructure, let's say infrastructure, because many of these movements are communicate each other. So they have a community. Me and my colleagues successfully infiltrated some of these channels. They are very specific Telegram channels. Telegram is one of the main used tools for distributing and communication and also chatting, because many of these youths they feel the need to communicate with same group and other youngs with the same political views. I can say that politically speaking, the whole structure is not clear, so it's a mixture between different political views. We have religious views, we have far left, nationalistic, pan-Slavonic, and I think it's indeed a mixture of different views, but somehow this is also part of the narrative, because you need to affect as much as possible and big as possible group of youths. And as I said, all of these narratives are mixing between different movements across the continent. So it is not a trend specific for Bulgaria, but in countries like Bulgaria, when let's say the younger generation is facing lack of politics, including from reformist and pro-Western parties, they are feel behind other parts of the society. So in Telegram and Facebook and also Threads is becoming more and more useful for these movements. They meet people like them, and the problem is that more and more, and I'm finishing, more and more these narratives they are transferred to offline actions. So we are facing more and more violent acts, especially in the capital Sofia, but also in other bigger cities across the country. And that's a huge problem because the current tools in the police forces and also in the ministries in the country, they don't understand how to act and how to prevent the distribution of this content and how this content is affecting youths. I can speak about people under 16. This is the most popular case in these groups.
Thank you, Ruslan. This is very eye-opening to kickstart our conversation. And indeed, we're talking about how online communication affects people's opinion, and talking about people's opinion, I now want to turn to our next speaker, Benjamin Haußmann, who is German, but he's been following very closely also, if I'm not wrong, the latest Hungarian elections. He's expert of people opinions and public opinions. So Benjamin, I turn over to you to help us better understand how this polling system works, whether we can trust the way we measure people's opinions, and what's the impact on election outcomes, especially, again, as Camila said at the beginning, in this very big electoral time in Europe. So over to you.
Well, hello, and thank you, Alessandra. So I'm speaking here from Budapest now. I've been watching the Hungarian elections for the past couple of months, and overall, the first thing I have to report is that TISA, so the opposition, won this election decisively. They took what currently looks like a 2/3 majority of the seats, and so thereby ended Orbán's 16-year rule. So that also means that they will be able to change the constitution and maybe also fix some part of the electoral system. So the first thing maybe to think about is who made this victory happen. I think the key demographic to focus on are the younger voters, who were much more pro-TISA than older cohorts by factors of 8-1 in some of the estimates. But secondly, and I think this is quite an important learning, is that it was not an urban revolt. So it was a campaign that broke out beyond big cities, and it went deep into the territories where the populists and where Fidesz had long relied on its strength. So this matters especially in Hungary, because Hungary is a direct mandate system to a very large extent, with more than half of the seats being decided by direct mandates. And in this kind of a system, the electoral mathematics becomes quite important, and an extra vote that you pile up in an urban area like Budapest is worth much less than a candidate vote in a marginal constituency. Moreover, the electoral map here has been redrawn in ways favoring Fidesz heavily by having many small rural constituencies and fewer urban ones. In some cases, it went so far that Fidesz even broke with the current existing law in Hungary by making districts in the countryside that were too small to be considered a district. So to win, TISA needed not just a clear victory, but it also needed an efficient distribution of its votes, particularly in the non-urban areas. And my focus here was identifying the maybe 20 constituencies that were close, even if TISA has a strong overall lead. And to effectively target these constituencies from a campaigning perspective, it was crucial to go beyond finding out which ones are close, but also who lives there, what they think about, and then to integrate data from a political campaign with this prediction of where it is important and who it is important to convince, so that the resources to promote a democratic campaign can be distributed not at random, but strategically and in the closest constituencies. So TISA was able to do this quite effectively. And if we compare this election's outcome to the 2022 election, TISA converted only a slightly higher number of overall candidate votes than Fidesz had in 2022 to even more direct mandates. So TISA really managed to win decisively in a system that was laid out a bit against them, and they won more than anyone, I think, could have reasonably expected. So yeah, one part of this is the strategic allocation of resources, and the other part is that the contents of the campaign, which faced up to a populist campaign, really tried hard to avoid the image of a liberal, educated, and urban-only sounding campaign, but to try to offer something to everyone. And now maybe to the polling. So why is polling in general difficult, and why is the Hungarian election also a good example of why polling is hard? So polls tend to do a good job at measuring what people would vote if everybody would go out to vote. And the biggest difficulty is to find out who is going to vote. In summary, we can say that broadly, the independent pollsters here in Hungary had both the direction and the magnitude of TISA's win right. The government-aligned pollsters had a massive polling error, and they were overstating the government's popularity, claiming that they would win even up to election day. And so the difficulty of predicting who is going to go vote is exacerbated in this election campaign because TISA's core support were the young voters, and Fidesz's core support were the old, uneducated voters. And now both uneducated voters and young voters are typically very hard to predict in terms of whether they will go vote or not. And especially the young voters are chronically overstating their intention to go vote and then don't go vote. Now, in the Hungarian election, turnout was very high, and it was driven by very high youth turnout, is at least the suspicion at the moment. So that is maybe an explanation for why the polls were broadly correct and what happened. I think it's also still interesting to keep this in mind at other elections, and to keep this in mind when you look at polling data, to understand that typically what is depicted is a scenario where most people who got asked actually go vote. So it's not some kind of rigging the polling numbers if they are wrong. Often it is just very hard to predict who to actually ask. And yeah, so the risk for TISA here was clear. If the young people don't go vote, it will be tough. If Fidesz manages to mobilize the old, uneducated people, it would become even tougher. But we have not seen unnaturally high mobilization of Fidesz old voters, but we have seen very, very high levels of mobilization from TISA. Yeah, so what are the broader lessons from this campaign? I would say, first of all, the young voters here in Hungary were not just symbolic for this election. They are the key force that made this election win a win. And the other thing is the contents that the party offered, a political perspective to a very broad range of people. Then the other learning I think that democratic campaigns should take from the Hungarian election campaign is that populist movements like Fidesz are populist in their contents, and they are very tactical in how they play an electoral system and who they tell what. And I think the first part you shouldn't copy, but the second part, which is to optimize within a given system, is something that democratic campaigns should learn and should improve. And I think TISA is a good example of how this was done.
Thank you.
And yeah. I'll hand over.
Thank you, Benjamin. I realize we're a little bit behind schedule, so I'm gonna go to the next speaker. But thank you so much for this analysis. It's indeed very interesting. I have to say, I was myself very surprised to see such a high voter turnout, especially among young people. It's very promising, I have to say. So. Fingers crossed. And now I turn to Martina Orlea, who's from Romania, who's an expert in campaign and strategies. And we're very happy to have her because she will bring her experience to us as a success story, I would say, after last year Romanians' election results. So Martina, I hand over to you. And again, the approach is to help the audience here not only better understand, but really take inspiration of example of actually being successful on the ground. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I tried to build my talk around the framework that I suggest you can all use when you think about your digital strategy. I'm a digital strategist, so this is what I know best. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm very happy to answer them. I'll also have some slides. Great. Okay. I guess you see my screen, right? Great. Thank you, Alessandra Surface.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So when we're thinking about like our supporters and about what we want people to do in terms of how we structure our digital strategy, there are like 3 steps which have been proven and studied both in commercial and political world. The first step is awareness. This is where people find out about you or about your cause. The second step is persuasion. This is the part where people start becoming interested in your cause. They start believing in your cause. It can be someone starts following your, to take the case of like a political elections, starts following your candidate profile online, or if you are an NGO, they start following your NGO and are aware of the cause that you fight for. And then there's the third phase, which is conversion, which is the phase where you ask your supporters to do something and they do it. Might it be donations, signing a petition, going out and protesting. And it's very important to think of your digital strategy as broken down into these 3 steps, because each one of the steps has different objectives, different ways to like measure the impact, and also different tricks on how you can speed it up. And that's what I'll try to do in the next 5 minutes to give you some tips about this. So when it comes to the, and of course, since it is a funnel, you are going to lose like people at every stage of the funnel. So your objective on the awareness phase is to like reach as many people as possible. They should be in your target group, but it's very okay if some of the people that you reach here, then like not part of your target group. So when it comes to awareness, just like try to reach as many people as possible. And you're going to measure this by reach and impressions, depending on what platform you are. Then when it comes to persuasion, it's a lot about like people seeing your message. And the tricky part about like social media is that unfortunately people do not really look at the message. Like if you think about your own scrolling habits, you scroll for like 5 seconds and then you're bored. It happens the same to the average user as well. So when you make your persuasive messages, what you have to think is like make them like in the short form video, 30 seconds max, and repeat the message. Like don't assume just because you published one video saying one message that was reached like 10,000 people, it means that like 10,000 people actually saw that message. In order to persuade them, you have to post like 5 videos saying that message. So, which increases the chance that like some of those people watching the videos like for 5 seconds will have watched it many times, that the message sticks with them. It's very similar to like billboard advertising, right? You see a Coca-Cola ad once, you forget about it. But when you see it on like 5 different billboards across town, you remember that Coca-Cola ad. And we have to think the same about social media. And then there is a third phase, which is conversion, where it's very important to have a very clear call to action. So every moment you ask your supporters to do something, it has to be very, very clear what you're asking them to do. One call to action per message or per post or per email. Now, how do people go from awareness from conversion? And this is, again, very similar to like commercial work. So in order for people to start being aware about your cause, they need to hear about your cause at least 2 to 3 times. After 2 to 3 times, this is when it sticks to them. And why are these numbers important? Well, they're important because if you run digital ads, for example, there is something called frequency, which allows you to say how many times a user should see an ad. So if you're running awareness ads, which again means people know about you, the frequency should be 2 to 3. If you're running persuasion ads, where you're trying to convince them of your message, right? So they've heard about your NGO, and now you want to make them love your NGO, they should see this message 6 to 10 times. And then the third phase, which is like conversion, which when you convert, you only need to target people that are already persuaded. You need to ask people 4 to 6 times to do something before they actually do something. Now, how can you shorten a bit some of these touch points or skip over some? So in terms of awareness, if you want people to like find out about your cause, the quickest thing you can do, and it's a bit sad because you need to pay money to social media corporations, but it is what it is. Running digital ads, it's an easy thing to be done by social causes, and it helps you like reach a large amount of people in a very quick time. So I recommend that you all experiment a bit with this. You can even start with budgets of like 100 euros and still reach like a reasonable amount of people. Then in terms of awareness, like it's very important to go where people are. A lot of like political causes, especially, they have special volunteers who go and like share their messages into closed groups, be it WhatsApp communities or Facebook groups. This is a way to like, you know, that people spend there. And if you take your message there, there's a higher chance for them to see it than like randomly in the feed. And the second one is like persuasion. What I recommend you all do is to like activate micro influencers. People trust influencers way more than like something randomly in their feed. And in order to do this successfully, I recommend that you create like micro influencer kit for every campaign that you run, that basically says like what's the message, where they can find all of the resources about it, and so on. Then secondly, as I said, optimize for short videos. 30-second videos are best on all platforms. And thirdly, create social proof. So people will be way more persuaded by a cause if they see other people support it. So ask your volunteers and people that support you to go to like post that you post and ask them to say, yeah, this is great. This is a great idea. I signed this petition and so on, because people will be more likely to follow it. And then in terms of conversion, here are 2 things that I recommend you all to try. So once you have people interested in your cause and you want to make them do things, it's way easier to ask them to do things on WhatsApp than on email, because people spend way more time on like WhatsApp than there. And it's very easy to like share messages, click on links and so on. So build a WhatsApp community. But before you build it, think very well about how you're going to manage it, because it can become quite messy. And secondly, another cool thing that I think it's worth doing is to start using many chat flows. If you've been on Instagram, you see that many influencers say like, comment this word and I will send you something, and or like you'll enter into this prize draw. That's being done using like automated chatbots that are very, very easy to set up right now. And it really increases the conversion rates for all communities. If you want to read a good case study on this, Mamdani used it very well in his New York City mayoral race. So I recommend you try it. He got for like $300, 77,000 emails, which is insane. Yeah, so to finalize a bit, if you have like a day of your digital person, if they have a day to like try something, I think these are the 3 things that are worth trying in digital now. That's it.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you so much. This is super practical and useful. So thank you so much for all your suggestions. So now I will conclude this first round and this first part of the session with an EU expert, especially on various fields like democracy, rule of law, Sophie Pornschlegel, who is here with us. So Sophie, over to you. After all these various inputs that touch upon various cases, including Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania. What is your view on this topic, especially EU level? Again, bearing in mind our audience of civic educators. So what's useful for them to know? What is the EU doing or not doing? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessandra, and thanks for the inputs. I think it was fascinating to hear the different parts, and also the last one being very practical. So maybe as a disclaimer, you know, the EU is very far from the national level most of the time, but they still are doing quite a bit to fight disinformation. And I just wanted to make 3 to 4 quick points to kind of say what's, you know, important to follow up at the moment. The first one is not directly linked to any kind of regulation, but it's important for funding reasons. There are currently EU budget negotiations going on with the program Agora EU, which includes the SERV, you know, civil society funding, plus Media Plus funding, which is especially focused on audiovisual, local news, and just news. So I think that's currently being negotiated. They have increased. So the proposal from the European Commission was very much increased to 8.7 billion for everything. But as you know, it's a negotiation, so it's likely to be cut. And I think there it's really important also to have civil society voices to say that, you know, you need the money, especially because the European Court of Auditors said it wasn't justified that there was such a big increase in the proposal of the Commission. So I think that's really something to bear in mind. The second part is that the EU is currently doing quite a bit of deregulation, as you might have noticed, which is called omnibus packages. And there is, well, there has been a digital omnibus package that has been presented, including a deregulation of the European AI Act. And whereas it concerns mostly ethical AI use for now, so it's very broad, it is important because it means that, you know, they're trying to deregulate whatever regulation there was there. So I invite you to kind of look at it. It includes data, e-privacy, cyber, and AI for now, but you never know, there might be more coming. The third point is that you've surely heard of this Digital Services Act, which is the most important regulation, I would say, when it comes to the digital sphere and social platforms. There, it's been implemented already. Well, it's been passed through, let's put it that way. It's currently in implementation at national level, and there's a huge issue that a lot of member states are not implementing it properly. You know, they're kind of slowing it down, delaying it, not doing what's necessary. Also golden plating it, that's called it, when you add some kind of stuff to certain regulations to make it more complicated at national level. So there also, it's important to kind of look at that, because it's one of the most important regulations that we have at the moment to make sure there is, you know, less disinformation in the online sphere. Maybe as a little point there are pressures from the US to make sure that we're not implementing it properly. So it kind of gets geopolitical there. But, you know, it's already passed through. So I think it's a question of implementing it properly. There's also been the Transparency and Targeting of Political Advertising Regulation, TTEA, but that one also is not necessarily working, and I'd love to hear, and I don't know if Benjamin worked on that, but to also see, because there has been quite a bit of political advertising happening in the Hungarian election. So I think there you also see that the regulations at EU level are not, unfortunately, always working to the point that they should. And maybe to make one last point, this is also due to the ownership structure, very simply, is that, you know, they're all US big tech platforms except for TikTok, which is Chinese. But it's very difficult to regulate something that doesn't belong to Europe in a way. And that's the whole question about digital sovereignty. One last point, and then I'll finish, is that there is now a Center for Democratic Resilience that has been built within the European Commission. It's been launched on the 24th of February, I think. And it was the flagship initiative of a big legislative package called the Democracy Shield. It was only soft law that said, so it wasn't like new regulations or directives, but, you know, a lot of like initiatives and recommendations. And there it's mostly against foreign interference, information manipulation. It's basically trying to kind of bring together or coordinate national actions together. It's completely voluntary, but that's also important to know, that member states really should participate in that to make sure that there's also cross-border exchanges on foreign interference and information manipulation. And that's just been launched, so feel free to have a look at it. Yeah, that's it. So that's what's going on at EU level. As I said, they're trying, but I think it's really important to also showcase the importance of that, and the fact that, you know, this is really a big threat to democracies at the moment. They know it, but I think in terms of money and in terms of regulation, it's not really balanced compared to the threat.
Thank you so much, Sophie. That was, again, very complementary to what we heard before and very useful to know. So we still have a few minutes for questions. I saw some in the chat and saw some reaction, but I wonder whether anyone has any questions they'd like to drop in the chat, and I would be more than happy to ask it to our speakers. If not, maybe I suggest we go with the question from, and sorry for the pronunciation, Vaclav, I guess, on understanding the results of the Hungarian elections. So maybe just quickly we can go back to this question from the chat. So he's asking, he read that TISA's decisive victory was caused partly by Orban's election system changes and gerrymandering, so TISA receiving so many mandates. Is it the case? And I ask our speakers who would like to intervene on this, maybe Benjamin, because I guess this was asked during your part, but anyone is welcome to reply, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Well, I guess the question is a bit vague, because the question is, what is decisive, and what is partly?
Yeah.
So it might be possible that there were 2-3 seats in the end, which were surprisingly positive for TISA in their demographic structure, and therefore they might have won them. But I think overall it has to be clear that TISA has won seats, for example, 2 seats that used to be in Budapest and are outside of Budapest. Those seats, had they been in Budapest, they would have been safe TISA seats. So I would still say the overall picture is TISA overcame a hurdle here, and not that the system really pushed them to the big win in the end.
Thank you, Benjamin. Anyone else who would like to comment on this, or ask or comment on anyone else's intervention that you heard? No, it seems it was all very clear and complementary, so that's great. So maybe I suggest we start moving towards the next part of the session, so the one that will be led by Maja Nenadović. Again, sorry for the pronunciation. Maja is a dialogue expert, facilitator expert, among many other things, and she will be guiding us in a more interactive part. So I will just stop there, Maja, give it the floor to you to guide us in this second part of the event. Thank you, Maja.
Sure, thank you, Alessandra. I just wanted to share with you all something that happened to me this Sunday, because it was really, truly exceptional. I was voting in the Hungarian elections, and I waited for some 2 or 3 p.m. I just wanted to see if the crowds would kind of get less so that I wouldn't have to wait in line. And I show up at my electoral spot, and they're looking for my name on the list. And it turns out that I am one of the, I think, 6 or 7 people from my district who haven't voted by that point. Everybody else had voted. So that for me was very kind of unique, because this honestly never happened in any other election I've ever taken part in. And yeah, it was an interesting thing when they cross off your name and you realize that like only 2 or 3 people are still missing from the entire part of town that I'm from. So yeah, this was just a little kind of segment I wanted to share about Hungary. But I wanted to ask all of you now, we've heard about these dangers, we've heard about online disinformation that impacts democracy and democratic processes. But one of the things that I would like us to get a little bit more granular and more personal about is this element of how does every single one of us experience this? Now, many of you here are experts, obviously, and you are working on this topic either with young people or with adults. But one of the things I would like to ask you, and I'm putting the question in the chat, and this is the part when I would very much welcome you to turn on your cameras and to share these personal experiences, is I would like to ask you for an instance or a moment when you yourself realized the impact of tech, either a positive one or a negative one, on democratic processes. Was there a moment when you kind of got the shivers and you were like, whoa, what is happening here?